Hey everybody. All right, so today we're going to be doing more on McCarthyism. Now, your common lit for your reading was Joseph McCarthy's Enemies from Within speech. And we've already talked about McCarthyism at the beginning of this study, and I mentioned it some with the Scarlet Letter because very quick rehash. Joseph McCarthy was a senator during the Cold War who was convinced that there were communist spies in virtually every facet, every area of American life, especially in the Army and in Hollywood. Hollywood's where it started. What started his downfall is where he started saying that he was in the Army as well, the Armed Forces. And back then, just as it is now, but especially back then, that was a big no-no. You didn't attack the armed forces. It's seen as one of the most noble areas you can enter. And even now, man, all the stuff that's going on with police across America, police brutality, and George Floyd and kneeling during the national anthem, all that, you still don't hear anyone talking about soldiers who defend our borders. It's a big no-no. And McCarthy basically he gave a speech titled Enemies from Within. And he condemns the threat of communism in it, and he accuses the State Department of communist infiltration. McCarthy was very popular with certain parts of America. He gained a lot of power during this, and he put people on national television, and he grilled them, Senate hearings and things like that about ties to communism. And the reason why Arthur Miller wrote the Crucible in response, he saw the parallels between the characters, the real life counterparts during the Salem witch trials that he wrote about in the Crucible to what was going on with McCarthyism. And it's called demagoguery. All right, basically a political or religious figure using fear to motivate or to get what they want, to appeal to people's base fears as opposed to their emotions. Opposed to their logic, their base fears as opposed to their logic. So we're going to read this, and the reason why I picked this is I introduced this text basically following Act 3. Now I know we've already finished the play, but this comes in after Act 3 because Act 4 is so small. It's a disaster for Proctor and them. And I like to introduce this because it's a comparison of the rhetoric and the scare tactics that McCarthy used when it comes to invading real or otherwise imagined enemies with what Paris and Hale, Paris and Abigail and Danforth, how they utilized fear in order to maintain their authority and increase their power and their influence. Paris was very about he's come to overthrow the court, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Paris liked the power that he had. He didn't care if innocent people were dying. So let's do our reading. All right, so Joseph McCarthy's Enemies from Within speech. He gave this speech on Lincoln's Day, which was like a celebration of President Lincoln's birthday. Before Martin Luther King Day, President Lincoln and President Washington each had their own holiday. So he starts it off as, I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm just going to go into some of it. I would like to be able to speak of peace in our time, of war being outlawed, and of disarmament. Disarmament means getting rid of weapons. These would be appropriate things, but that's not going to happen, is what he's going in here. 5 years after a world war has been won, men's hearts should anticipate a long peace. Men's minds should be free from the heavy weight that comes with war. And then he goes here but that's not the case because there's a new menace coming about. All right, and the new menace is the Cold War. It's the Reds, the Soviet Union. He talks here about Joseph Lenin. Joseph Lenin was a famous Russian leader. "We are living," said Lenin, "not merely in a state, but in a system of states, and the existence of the Soviet Republic side by side with Christian states for a long time is unthinkable." Look, Joseph McCarthy was not wrong in his statements about Russia being a threat. He wasn't. We were just as much a threat to Russia as they were to us. And this is in no way condemning Joseph McCarthy for his tactics, and McCarthyism is in no way an embracing of the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union is one of the most horrible forces that ever existed, responsible for countless millions and millions of death. It was not good at all. But whether or not McCarthy's fears were founded and the results of what ended up happening to innocent people, his intentions may have been pure and good, but the result of this movement that he led ended up resulting in lives ruined of likely innocent people. So we're going to go in here, and he goes into a whole big thing about more information, more facts, etc., more things he's trying to play out. This is a real legitimate threat. At war's end, we were physically the strongest nation on earth, and at least potentially the most powerful intellectually and morally. Ours could have been the honor of being a beacon in the desert of destruction, a shining living proof that civilization was not yet ready to destroy itself. Unfortunately, we have failed and tragically to rise to the opportunity. So in other words, they're different than us. And it's our responsibility as the greatest country, the greatest people, is what he's saying, to make sure that this horrible doesn't happen or befall the world. Every person, every society thinks they're the best. It's pride, it's human nature, it's hubris. It goes in here, more information. This, ladies and gentlemen, gives you somewhat a picture of the type of individuals who have been helping to shape our foreign policy. In my opinion, the State Department, which is one of the most important government departments, is thoroughly infested with communists. Then he says right here, I have in my hand 57 cases of individuals. He doesn't show it. It could be a blank piece of paper for all we know, or it could be a recipe to a chocolate cake. He doesn't show it. He uses that emblem he uses that piece of paper as an emblem of the fear. Gives more people, the FBI, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very detailed speech, and had a lot of good points. He was very good at rhetoric. He was very good at speaking. He was very good at getting his point across. He has lighted the spark, which is resulting in a moral uprising, and will end only when his whole sorry mess of twisted, warped thinkers are swept from the national scene, so that we may have a new birth of national honesty and decency in government. All right, let's get ahead of these questions. Number one, how does McCarthy frame the conflict between democracy and communism in his introduction? The answer is A. McCarthy frames the conflict between democracy and communism, that is, between a Christian society and the threat of atheism. They're different than us. Their way is wrong, our way is right. If you don't do something violently, then their way is going to take over our way. Period. It's fear. It's primal. It's the base emotion for good and for bad things to happen. Number two, the answer to number two is, hold on a second, let me find where I was. Number two, the answer is B. Today we are engaged in a final all-out battle between communist and atheism and Christianity. No. Look, it's always a final all-out battle, according to demagogues. Demagogue is a political leader or a religious leader who uses fear other than logic. He appeals to people's base desires and instincts as opposed to their logical parts of their brain. 1 second. Let me deal with my dog. Apologies. All right, go down here, number three. Why does McCarthy mention these people? The answer is A. He uses them as examples of communist corruption in the State Department, as both men receive better positions despite suspicion. Suspicion is the word here. It's not proven. Suspicion of communist sympathies. He goes on this huge witch hunt. And when I teach it in class, I show videos of the proceedings. He calls people up, especially the more power he gains, and he puts them in front of a huge group of people, and he badgers them. And it's on national television, and these people's names, simply by being tied and mentioned to communism, their lives are ruined. And what he also does is people, just like in the Crucible, people who are mentioned with it, but then they say, no, I'm not, but I'll tell you other people. They name names, all right? It's no different than Harry Potter. If you watched Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, they had the people in there, and they're like, no, don't send me back to Azkaban. I'll tell you who these people are, etc. Same thing. The answer number 4 is C. Number 5, as one of our historical figures once said, when a democracy is destroyed, it will not be because of enemies from without, but rather enemies from within. How does this quote reveal McCarthy's point of view and advance the purpose of his speech? He created paranoia. And if you can get other people to distrust their neighbor and to trust you, you have power over those people. And you can do it for good or for bad. As far as McCarthy is attacked, it's no different than Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, back a long time ago when we did Scarlet Letter. He used fear as a motivating factor. He thought he was saving people's souls. Here, McCarthy is genuine. McCarthy is genuine, and he thinks he's saving America, but he uses fear to get what he wants, to rally to the cause, because fear is the most powerful emotion, most powerful human primal emotion. How did McCarthy's reference to Abraham Lincoln at the beginning of his speech support his argument? Basically, we were great, we could be great, all these things, but we're not great. Appealing to what we could be, appealing to this idea of we've changed, and not in a good way, because people are afraid of change. At the time of his speech, why did America fear communism? We feared communism because communism especially communist Russia, was not good. I mean, they were very powerful as well. And we'd already gone through one battle, one war, with one horrible dictator who tried to take over and didn't want to happen again. It was legitimate fear. Context of this speech: how does prejudice emerge? Prejudice emerge. You're different than me, and we want the same thing, and there's not enough of it to go around. Prejudice. Or you're different than me, and you're going to take over, and you're going to make my people more like your people, and I don't want that. Number 3, context of the speech: how can fear be used to manipulate? Fear is being used to manipulate as long as there's been people. Fear. Do this or this will happen. Period. Okay, let's wrap up. The mosquitoes were getting too much for me. So, that is Enemies from Within. That's the end of Joseph McCarthy. And if you want more information about McCarthy, you can just look it up, what happened to him. He went a little too far. He started pushing on the armed services. And President Reagan, who was a actor at the time, he was called before the McCarthy's committee, and he kind of gave him what for. And that's something that spurred Reagan on into political career because of the way he stood up to Joseph McCarthy. All right, so next I want you to read, the next assignment is going to be Invictus, and I know you've already read Invictus once, so hey, it should be easy to go over, but we did it, but as we talked about the Scarlet Letter and Hester and Dimsdale, etc., now we're going to apply it to John Proctor and that decision Proctor made to keep his name, to keep his life, and to suffer the fate for that. All right, till I see you again, great day to be a warrior.